You are on HOA violation vault. The case file was not closed. It was hidden. You are about to get a reinspection fee. That is what Gloria Turner said the second I opened my mailbox and found the invoice with a blank description line. She was standing 3 feet away with her portable folder organizer tucked under one arm and her portable radio earpiece already in, like she had been waiting for me to show up. I work as a notary public, so I keep everything documented, and the first thing I did was pull out my phone and snap a photo of the invoice before she could say another word. Gloria tapped her earpiece twice and told me the charge was legitimate, that I had 30 days to pay, and that my file was being transferred to collections because I kept asking for the audit trail. I had been asking for 2 weeks. She refused to explain what the vendor did, what date the work happened, or why the line item said vendor coordination fee with nothing else. When I told her I was not paying until I saw documentation, she smiled and said I was stalling. Then she said the board had already voted to authorize a lien if I missed the deadline. I live in Worcester, Massachusetts, in a neighborhood where curb appeal matters more than reality. The Harborview Design Review Association controls everything from mailbox placement to the exact shade of trim paint you can use, and Gloria Turner is the vendor coordinator, which means she threatens contractors and service techs for a living. I moved here 18 months ago because the schools were decent and I needed to keep my kids' routine stable after the divorce. The HOA seemed annoying but manageable. That changed the day I found a mystery charge on my statement and Gloria refused to provide a single receipt. The invoice listed $375 under a line that said Vendor Coordination Administrative Processing. No date, no vendor name, no description of work. I sent an email to the management company asking for the contract, the work order, and the payment authorization. They replied 2 days later saying all inquiries about fees had to go through the board liaison, which was Gloria. I called her. She told me the fee was already approved and that I was wasting her time. I asked her to forward the paperwork. She said it was in the file and I could request it at the next board meeting in 3 weeks. I told her I needed it now because the 30-day clock was already running. She said that was my problem, hung up, and then sent me a follow-up email saying any further delays would result in a late fee and a referral to collections. I printed the email, highlighted the line about collections, and added it to a binder I started that same night. The binder had tabs for correspondence, invoices, meeting minutes, and a section I labeled Cold Case because something about the way Gloria dodged my questions felt familiar. I started digging through old emails and PDFs the management company had sent when I moved in, and I found a resident complaint from 2 years before I bought the house. The complaint was about a mystery towing incident where 3 cars got hooked in one night, with no warning and no violation notices on file. The board minutes from that month mentioned the towing but said the issue was resolved internally and no refunds were issued. That was it, no follow-up. No explanation, just a note that the vendor coordinator had handled it. The vendor coordinator 2 years ago was Gloria Turner. I went back further. I found a thread on a neighborhood Facebook group from 3 years ago where someone posted about getting fined for a landscaping violation they swore they had fixed before the inspection. The residents said they had photos proving compliance, but the board rejected the appeal and the fine stuck. The thread had 20 comments, most of them from people saying they had similar experiences, fines that did not match the violation date, inspection reports that contradicted their own records, and paperwork that kept changing between the notice and the hearing. One person said they got a certified letter claiming they were 60 days late on a special assessment, but they had a canceled check proving they paid on time. When they showed the check to the board, Gloria told them the payment had been applied to a different line item and they still owed the assessment. The person eventually paid again just to make it stop. Every single complaint pointed back to vendor coordination, payment processing, or inspection scheduling. Gloria was involved in all of it. I kept reading. I found a post from 18 months ago, right around the time I moved in, where a resident said they were moving out early because the HOA had become a nightmare. They mentioned backdated notices, fees that appeared out of nowhere, and a board that refused to investigate. The post had been deleted, but someone had quoted it in a reply. I screenshotted the whole thread and added it to the binder. Then I searched the county property records and found that the resident who posted it had sold their house in a short sale. They lost money on the deal. That was the pattern. Gloria weaponized fees, backdated notices to manufacture violations, and forced residents into paying or moving. If they pushed back, she escalated until they gave up. The towing incident 2 years ago was not a one-off mistake. It was a test run. The next morning, I got another email from Gloria. It said my payment was now 15 days overdue and that I had failed to respond to multiple requests for documentation. I checked my inbox. I had responded 3 times. I replied again, attached screenshots of my previous emails, and asked her to confirm receipt. She did not respond. 2 days later, I got a certified letter in the mail. It was from the HOA attorney, and it said I was in violation of the payment policy, that my account was being referred to collections, and that the board had authorized a lien against my property if I did not pay the full amount plus a $100 administrative fee within 10 business days. The letter was dated 4 days before the email Gloria sent saying I was 15 days overdue. They had backdated the attorney letter to make it look like I had been ignoring them for weeks. I photographed the envelope with the postmark, scanned the letter, and added both to the binder. Then I called the management company and asked to speak to someone above Gloria. They transferred me to a regional manager named Phil, who listened to my summary and then told me he would look into it. He called back 20 minutes later and said Gloria had confirmed that all the documentation was in order and that I needed to pay immediately or face further action. I asked him if he had actually reviewed the file or if he had just taken her word for it. He paused, then said the board had full authority over fee disputes and I needed to attend the next meeting if I wanted to appeal. The meeting was in 2 weeks. The lien deadline was in 8 days. I went to the management company office in person. I brought the binder, a printed timeline, and a folder with every email and letter I had received. The receptionist told me Phil was in a meeting, so I sat in the lobby and waited. 40 minutes later, Gloria walked in. She saw me, stopped in the doorway, and asked the receptionist what I was doing there. The receptionist said I was waiting for Phil. Gloria said that was unnecessary because all fee disputes had to go through her first. I stood up, walked over, and told her I had been trying to go through her for 3 weeks and she had refused to provide any documentation. She pulled out her portable folder organizer, flipped it open, and pulled out a laminated policy sheet. She held it out between us and said the policy was clear. All vendor coordination fees were non-refundable and non-negotiable. I asked her to show me the section that said I could not see the invoice. She tapped the sheet and said it was right there, that I was wasting everyone's time, and that my camera did not matter because her minutes were the truth. Your camera does not matter, my minutes are the truth. That was the line. I knew I would need it later. Phil finally came out. He looked at me, then at Gloria, and asked what was going on. I said I needed to see the vendor invoice and the work authorization for the $375 charge. Gloria said the documentation was privilege board material and I was not entitled to it until the hearing. Phil nodded and said that sounded right. I asked him if he had read the certified letter his attorney sent me, the one that was backdated by 4 days. He blinked. I pulled the letter and the envelope out of my folder, set them on the reception counter, and pointed to the date on the letter and the postmark on the envelope. Phil picked them up, looked at both, and asked Gloria when the letter was drafted. She said it was drafted on the date printed on the letter and mailed the same day. I pointed to the postmark again. It was 4 days later. Phil set the papers down and told Gloria they needed to talk privately. She said that was fine, grabbed her folder organizer, and followed him into the back office. The door closed. I sat back down and waited another 30 minutes. When Phil came back out, he handed me a printed payment summary and said the board had agreed to waive the late fee as a courtesy, but the original charge still stood and I needed to pay within 5 days. I asked him about the backdated letter. He said it was a clerical error and would not happen again. I asked him about the vendor invoice. He said Gloria would email it to me by the end of the day. I thanked him, took the payment summary, and left. Gloria did not come back out to the lobby while I was there. The invoice never came. Instead, I got another email from Gloria that night. It said the board had reviewed my complaint and determined that I was in violation of the records request policy because I had submitted multiple duplicate requests within a 30-day period. The email said I was now banned from submitting further requests until the next quarterly meeting, which was 2 months away. The email also said that my refusal to pay the vendor coordination fee was being treated as a refusal to comply with association rules, and that the board had scheduled a hearing for the following week to determine additional penalties. The hearing was on a Wednesday at 2 in the afternoon, right in the middle of my kids' school pickup time. I am trying to keep my kids' routine stable, and the HOA kept targeting school pickup times. That was not an accident. I called my attorney that night. Her name is Rachel, and she is a former HOA board member who recognizes Karen's pattern because she saw it happen in her own neighborhood 5 years ago. She told me the backdated letter was enough to file a complaint with the state, but that it would take months to resolve, and I still had to deal with the hearing. She said the best move was to show up with everything documented, record the meeting if Massachusetts allowed it, and force them to answer questions on the record. Then she said something that stuck with me. She said if Gloria had been doing this for years, there was probably a trail of complaints buried in the old board minutes and resident files, and that someone on the current board might not know how deep it went. She told me to find an ally, someone who had been around long enough to remember the old incidents but was not part of Gloria's inner circle. I thought about the towing incident from 2 years ago. I pulled up the board minutes again and found the names of the board members from that meeting. 2 of them were still on the board. One was Gloria. The other was a guy named Ed, who was listed as the treasurer. I did not know Ed, but I knew where he lived, because his house was 2 streets over and he had a Harborview Design Review Association sign in his front yard. I walked over the next evening and knocked on his door. He opened it, saw me, and asked if I was the guy who kept emailing Gloria about the vendor fee. I said yes. He smiled, stepped outside, and closed the door behind him. Then he asked me if I wanted to see something interesting. Ed went back inside and came out with a printed email. He handed it to me without saying anything. The email was from Gloria to the board, dated 6 months before I moved in, and it was a proposal to streamline vendor payments by giving her sole authority to approve invoices under $500 without board review. The proposal passed. The email thread included replies from 3 board members saying it sounded efficient. Ed's reply was the only one that said he wanted to see quarterly audits to make sure the payments were legitimate. Gloria replied to him directly and said audits were unnecessary because she kept detailed records and the management company reviewed everything. Ed told me he never saw a single quarterly audit after that. Ed said he voted against Gloria's re-election last year, but she won anyway because most residents did not show up to the annual meeting and she controlled the proxy votes. He said he stayed on the board because he wanted to keep an eye on her, but she had gotten better at hiding things. He told me the towing incident 2 years ago was suspicious from the start because the violation notices were issued the same night the cars got hooked, and the tow company was a vendor Gloria had just added to the approved list. When residents complained, Gloria said the notices had been mailed 3 days earlier, and the residents must have missed them. Ed checked with the post office and found out the notices were mailed same day, not 3 days earlier. He brought it up at the next board meeting and Gloria said he was confused, that the mailing date on the vendor log was correct, and that the post office must have made a mistake. The board voted to close the issue. Ed was the only no vote. He asked me if I still had the backdated attorney letter. I said yes. He told me to bring it to the hearing along with anything else I had, and that he would back me up if I could prove Gloria was doctoring records. Then, he said something that made my stomach drop. He said the management company had switched to a new portal system 8 months ago, and that all the old records had been migrated over by Gloria's assistant. He said the migration took 3 weeks, and during that time, no one else had access to the files. If Gloria wanted to alter anything, that was her window. I went home and logged into the portal. I pulled up my account history and checked the metadata on every document. Most of them showed creation dates that matched the dates printed on the letters. But 3 documents had creation dates that were weeks after the printed dates. One of them was the certified letter threatening the lien. The creation date was 5 days after the date printed on the letter, and 2 days after I had filed my first records request. Gloria had backdated the letter and uploaded it to the portal to make it look like I had been ignoring her for weeks. I screenshotted the metadata, printed the page, and added it to the binder. Then I checked the vendor invoice. It was not in the portal. I checked the board minutes from the month the charge appeared. The minutes mentioned a vote to approve vendor coordination fees, but did not list any amounts or vendor names. I went back to the minutes from the previous 6 months and found the same pattern. Votes to approve fees, no details, no vendor names. Every vote passed unanimously except for one. Ed voted no. I called Ed and told him what I found. He said that was exactly what he expected, and that Gloria had been doing it for years. He told me the board used to require vendor invoices to be attached to the minutes, but Gloria pushed through a rule change 3 years ago that said invoices were confidential vendor information and could only be reviewed by the board liaison. The board liaison was Gloria. Ed said he had been trying to get the rule reversed for 2 years, but he could not get a second vote. Ed told me he had something else. He said he had been keeping his own records because he did not trust Gloria, and that he had a copy of the old vendor log from before the portal migration. The log listed every vendor payment for the past 4 years, including the ones Gloria had approved on her own authority. He said some of the payments looked legitimate, but a lot of them were to vendors he had never heard of, and several of them were for amounts just under the $500 threshold that required board approval. He offered to send me the log, but he said I had to keep it off the record because he was not supposed to have a copy. I told him I would keep it quiet until I needed it. The hearing was in 3 days. I had the backdated letter, the metadata screenshots, the old Facebook complaints, the portal audit log, and Ed's quiet support. But I did not have the vendor invoice, and I still did not know what the $375 charge was for. I needed something bigger. I needed proof that Gloria had staged the whole thing. I went back to the neighborhood Facebook group and messaged the person who had posted about the landscaping fine 3 years ago. They did not respond. I messaged 2 other people who had commented on the thread. One of them replied and said they had moved out of the neighborhood and wanted nothing to do with the HOA. The other one said they still lived there but were afraid to say anything because Gloria had threatened to fine them for posting negative comments about the board. They said Gloria had told them the comments violated the community standards policy and that any further posts would result in a formal hearing. They deleted the posts and stopped complaining. I asked them if they remembered anything specific about the fine. They said Gloria had claimed the landscaping work was not done to code, but the inspector who signed off on the work said it was fine. When they brought the inspector's report to the hearing, Gloria said the report was outdated and that a second inspection had found new violations. They never saw the second inspection report. They paid the fine because they could not afford to fight it. If you are enjoying this, hit that like button and subscribe. You will want to see how this ends. That was the confirmation I needed. Gloria was creating fake violations, backdating notices, and using vendor coordination fees to funnel money through the system. The $375 charge on my account was probably a ghost payment tied to a vendor that did not exist or work that never happened. I just had to prove it. The day before the hearing, I got a call from an unknown number. I answered. It was the tow driver from 2 years ago, the one who had hooked the 3 cars in one night. He said Ed had given him my number and told him I was looking into Gloria's vendor scheme. He said he remembered that night because it was the weirdest job he had ever done. Gloria had called him at 9 at night and told him to go to the neighborhood and hook any car parked on the street in violation of the overnight parking rule. He asked her for the violation notices. She said they had already been mailed and he did not need to wait for confirmation. He hooked 3 cars and dropped them at the impound lot. The next morning, all 3 owners showed up at the lot saying they never got a notice. The tow company checked with Gloria, and she sent over a batch of notices with that night's date on them. The driver said the timestamps did not make sense, but his boss told him to stay out of it because Gloria was a repeat client and they did not want to lose the contract. I asked him if he still had records from that night. He said his company kept logs for 7 years and he could pull the dispatch report. I asked him if he would be willing to send it to me. He said yes, but only if I kept his name out of it until I had everything locked down, because he did not want Gloria coming after his company. I agreed. He sent me the dispatch log an hour later. The log showed that Gloria called at 9:03, the hookup happened at 9:40, and the notices were uploaded to the tow company portal at 10:15, after the cars were already on the truck. The notices were backdated to 3 days earlier. I added the dispatch log to the binder. I now had 4 separate pieces of evidence proving Gloria backdated records: the attorney letter with the mismatched postmark, the portal metadata screenshots, the Facebook complaints, and the tow dispatch log. I also had Ed ready to testify that Gloria had pushed through rule changes to hide vendor invoices, and I had a former victim willing to confirm the pattern. But I still needed a trump card, something I could deploy at the hearing that would flip the whole thing in front of witnesses. I waited for the right audience, because the reveal needed witnesses. The hearing was scheduled for 2 in the afternoon at the clubhouse. I showed up 15 minutes early with the binder, the printed timeline, and my phone fully charged. The board was already seated, Gloria at the center with her portable folder organizer open in front of her, 2 other board members on either side, and Ed at the far end taking notes. About a dozen residents were scattered in the chairs facing the board. I recognized a few of them from the neighborhood. 2 of them were the people who had been whispering and pointing near the mailbox cluster the week before. Gloria started the meeting by reading a prepared statement. She said I had repeatedly refused to pay a legitimate vendor coordination fee, that I had submitted harassing and duplicative records requests, and that I had violated the community standards policy by publicly questioning board decisions. She said the board had no choice but to impose additional penalties, including a $500 fine for non-compliance and a formal reprimand that would be added to my homeowner file. She asked if I had anything to say before the board voted. I stood up and said I did have something to say. I told the board I had been trying to get documentation for the vendor coordination fee for 3 weeks, and that Gloria had refused every request. I said I had proof that she had backdated notices, altered records, and staged violations to force residents into paying fraudulent fees. Gloria interrupted me and said I was out of order, that I did not have the floor, and that I was violating the meeting rules. I kept talking. I told the board I had 4 separate pieces of evidence proving Gloria's pattern, and that I was prepared to share them with the state if the board did not address the issue immediately. Gloria stood up, slammed her hand on the table, and said my camera did not matter, because her minutes were the truth. That was the boomerang moment. I smiled, pulled out my phone, and said I agreed that the truth mattered, which was why I wanted everyone to hear a recording. Gloria's face went white. I tapped play. The recording was from the day I went to the management office, and Gloria told me the vendor fee was non-refundable and that my camera did not matter because her minutes were the truth. The audio was clear. You could hear her say it twice. The room went silent. One of the board members asked Gloria if that was her voice. She did not answer. Ed looked at me and nodded. I played a second clip. This one was from the tow driver's dash cam, which he had pulled for me the night before. The video showed Gloria standing next to the tow truck at 9:40, pointing at 3 cars and telling the driver to hook them immediately. The driver asked for the violation notices. Gloria said they were already mailed, and he did not need to wait. The timestamp on the video was clear. The notices were uploaded 15 minutes later, after the cars were already on the truck. The board members stared at the screen. One of them asked Gloria why she was at the tow site if the notices had already been mailed. Gloria said the video was taken out of context and that I was harassing her with doctored evidence. I held up the dispatch log and said the timestamps matched the video and that the tow company had confirmed the notices were backdated. One of the residents in the audience stood up and asked if the board was going to do anything about this. Another resident said they had been fined for a landscaping violation 3 years ago, and the same thing had happened to them. A third resident said they had paid a vendor coordination fee last year and never got an invoice. The room started buzzing. Gloria tried to regain control by saying the meeting was getting off topic and that individual complaints needed to be filed separately. Ed interrupted her. He said he had been asking for vendor audits for 2 years and Gloria had blocked every request. He pulled out his own printed timeline and said the board needed to suspend all vendor payments until an independent audit could be completed. The other 2 board members looked at each other. One of them said that sounded reasonable. The other one nodded. Gloria stood up, grabbed her portable folder organizer, and said the board did not have the authority to suspend payments without a full vote. Ed said they could call for a vote right now. Gloria said the vote required a quorum and that she was leaving, which meant there was no quorum. She turned toward the door. I stepped in front of her and said I had one more thing. I pulled out the payment confirmations proving I was never delinquent despite their fee blast. I handed the officer on scene a clean packet and asked for an incident number. The officer was a city code enforcement inspector I had called earlier that day, and I had asked him to attend the meeting as a neutral witness. He was standing near the back of the room taking notes. Gloria saw him and froze. The inspector stepped forward and said he had been reviewing the complaint, and that based on the evidence presented, there were multiple violations of state HOA transparency laws and possible fraud. He said he was opening an official investigation and that all vendor payments needed to be frozen until the investigation was complete. Gloria's face went red. She said the inspector had no authority over internal HOA matters. The inspector said he had full authority to investigate fraud and that the HOA attorney would be receiving a formal notice within 24 hours. Gloria tried to push past me toward the door. The inspector told her to stay for the remainder of the meeting. She ignored him. Ed called for a motion to suspend Gloria from her vendor coordinator role pending the investigation. One of the other board members seconded it. The motion passed 3-0. Gloria was the only one who did not vote, because she was already halfway out the door. The residents started clapping. 2 of them were filming the whole thing on their phones. The hearing ended 20 minutes later. The board voted to waive all pending fees against my account, refund the $375 charge, and issue a formal apology for the backdated notices. Ed was appointed interim vendor coordinator, and the board scheduled an emergency audit for the following week. The city inspector told me he would need copies of all my evidence for the state investigation, and that I should expect follow-up interviews over the next few months. He also said the HOA attorney was likely going to recommend a settlement to avoid a lawsuit, and that I should consult with my own attorney before agreeing to anything. I called Rachel that night. She said the HOA would almost certainly settle quickly to reduce liability, and that I should ask for full reimbursement of my costs, including attorney fees, plus a binding agreement that the HOA would implement new transparency policies and remove Gloria from any leadership role. She also said I should document everything that happened at the hearing, because it was rare to get that kind of public meltdown on record. I told her I had 2 phone recordings, 1 dashcam video, and about 15 witnesses. She laughed and said Gloria had handed me the case on a silver platter. The settlement offer came 10 days later. The HOA agreed to pay my documented costs, remove Gloria from the board, and implement quarterly vendor audits with full board review. They also agreed to revise the record's request policy so that any resident could access vendor invoices without going through a board liaison. The settlement included a non-disparagement clause, but Rachel negotiated it down so I could still talk about the case as long as I did not name the management company. I signed it. Gloria resigned from the board the same day the settlement was finalized. I heard from Ed that she tried to claim the resignation was voluntary and that she was stepping down for personal reasons, but everyone knew what had happened. The neighborhood Facebook group exploded with comments from people sharing their own stories about Gloria's fees, backdated notices, and vendor scams. One person said they had paid over $2,000 in fraudulent charges over 3 years. Another person said Gloria had threatened to foreclose on their house over a $50 late fee. The stories kept coming for weeks. The state investigation wrapped up 4 months later. The inspector found that Gloria had approved over $30,000 in fraudulent vendor payments over 5 years, most of them to shell companies that did not exist or contractors who had never done any work. Some of the money had been kicked back to Gloria through fake consulting fees. The state revoked her notary license, fined the HOA $15,000 for failing to audit vendor payments, and referred the case to the district attorney for possible criminal charges. Gloria settled with the state before it went to trial. She paid restitution, agreed to a lifetime ban from serving on any HOA board in Massachusetts, and moved out of the neighborhood 6 months later. Ed stayed on as treasurer and pushed through a slate of reforms that included monthly financial transparency reports, open board meetings with recorded minutes, and a resident advisory committee that reviewed all vendor contracts before they were approved. The neighborhood is quieter now. People actually show up to meetings. The Harborview Design Review Association is still annoying, but it is manageable, and no one is getting scammed anymore. I still keep the binder. It sits on my desk as a reminder that documentation wins, that you should never assume the people in charge are acting in good faith, and that sometimes the only way to stop a bully is to make them answer for every lie in front of everyone they tried to intimidate. Gloria thought her minutes were the truth. Turns out the truth does not care what she writes down. Glad you stayed for the whole story.